Okay, let's dive into something that feels incredibly relevant right now. We've been looking at some source material with this really powerful idea, almost like a central metaphor for how we navigate the world.
Right. It's this concept that we're all born, with a system already running inside us, a default OS, they call it.
Like the software on a new computer, right?
Yeah.
The one we didn't install.
Exactly. It's inherited.
Yeah.
The source says, call it culture, family, maybe even trauma.
Or just that feeling of, well, this is just how things are.
Yeah, that. It's all preloaded before we even really grasp that we have choices.
So our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack this default OS metaphor.
And connect it to some honestly fascinating points that sources make about artificial intelligence. AI feels like it's building whole new systems around us.
Totally. And then try to figure out, okay, what does all this mean for genuine choice, for agency, in a world that feels like it's barreling towards automation?
Because the sources hand us this idea of our built-in programming, right alongside all this talk about AI, how it could shape our decisions, maybe even make them for us.
It really feels like two sides of the same coin, doesn't it? Old programming, potential new programming.
Definitely.
So this default human OS, it's more than just a catchy phrase, the material suggests. For most people, it just runs their whole lives.
And what's really striking is that people often don't. They don't check the source code,
Yeah, they don't stop and ask that really crucial question from the source. Who programmed me to believe this?
Right. It's like accepting the whole startup sequence without ever looking at what's actually launching.
And the result of just running on default. The sources paint this picture of people obeying rules or expectations without really knowing why.
Or resisting things without understanding what they're pushing against, reacting automatically.
Like background processes on a computer, just running.
Exactly. And all the while genuinely believing they're making free choices, when really they're just running lines of code they inherited.
That's a powerful image. Someone thinking they're typing away, but the machine's just doing its thing based on old settings?
It is. But here's the hopeful part, the counter idea in the sources. Belief can be imposed, yes. That system can be given to you.
What?
But it can also be rewritten. That's the key.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. If most people are on default, the sources talk about the courageous ones.
Yeah, and they're not necessarily different kinds of people. They just make a different choice about that startup sequence.
They become active users, you mean?
Kind of, yeah. Sticking with the metaphor, they roll up their sleeves, they debug the system, find the errors.
Uninstall things.
Uninstall programs that don't work anymore. Sometimes, the sources say, they crash the whole system on purpose and rebuild it from scratch.
Wow. And these lines of code they're looking at,
Yeah.
What are we talking about here?
Really fundamental stuff. The sources mention religious lines, political lines.
Passed down beliefs.
Yeah, or even old emotional scars that we've sort of disguised as wisdom, things we think are just us.
Right. Until that moment, the sources highlight. When someone looks at one of those lines, really looks at it.
And decides, you know what? This belief, this reaction, it doesn't serve me anymore.
That's the turning point. That's when belief stops being the default setting.
And becomes an active decision made by you.
But the sources are clear. This isn't easy. Rewriting takes awareness, right? Seeing the code, not just the output.
Oh, absolutely. It can be painful. Realizing parts of your identity might be built on, someone else's programming.
It takes courage to admit that. Wow, I've been running someone else's script.
Definitely. Which leads straight to those big questions the sources pose. Questions for all of us, really.
Like, who wrote your code? Whose ideas are running your life?
And who benefits if you never rewrite it? Because often, someone does.
And the hopeful one, who might you become if you finally did rewrite it?
Huge questions. And the sources wrap this metaphor up so powerfully. Hitting reboot, crashing the system. Yeah, it's scary. It's uncomfortable.
But the alternative, staying asleep at the keyboard, just letting the automated stuff run.
That's not really living, is it? That's just automation.
And the core message is clear. You were never meant to be just a program being run.
You're meant to rewrite.
Okay. Holding on to that powerful idea, our internal default OS. Let's pivot. Let's talk about the other big theme here. Artificial intelligence.
AI. Feels like it could be creating whole new external default systems for us, right?
Exactly. And it's everywhere now. One source defines it pretty simply.
Yeah.
It's machines doing tasks that usually need human smarts.
Like learning, reasoning, understanding language, making decisions, creating stuff.
They had that funny example, didn't they? Asking AI to make a 3D image of an ant dressed as a Viking.
Yeah, because Obviously, that's peak intelligence work right there, but it shows the creative potential.
And the sources break it down, narrow AI for specific tasks, Siri, ChatGPT, that sort of thing.
Right? Good at one job. And then the theoretical stuff, general AI, that could do pretty much anything a human mind can.
Yeah.
Still sci-fi for now.
But for a real-world example of narrow AI, the sources point to the fast food drive-thru.
Oh yeah, happens all the time. You talk to the box, it gets your order, maybe suggests adding fries.
Seems simple, but there's some clever AI working there.
For sure. Multiple layers. First, voice recognition, speech to text, turning your voice into words.
Okay.
Then, natural language processing, NLP. That's the AI figuring out the meaning, like what you actually want to order, even if you say it weirdly.
And the upsell. Want a milkshake with that?
Often AI-powered recommendation systems, learning patterns, what people buy together, time of day.
The sources mention specific tools behind this, like Google Dialogflow or Amazon Lex, and frameworks like TensorFlow. Just reminding us it's not magic, it's code. Sophisticated code.
Right. And this spread of AI, even in simple things like ordering food, leads us straight to a big concern in the sources, one that really echoes that internal programming idea.
Which is?
The fear that we might just slowly surrender our autonomy, our free will, to these machines.
It sounds pretty dramatic, but the sources explore it seriously. One mentions Jeff Hawkins' view.
Right, from On Intelligence. Hawkins suggests we might eventually hand over huge life decisions.
Like who to marry, where to live, what job to take, things that feel deeply personal now.
Exactly, and the sources use that cool analogy from the old TV show Quantum Leap. Imagine an AI giving you odds.
Odds.
Yeah, like marry this person, 98% chance of long-term success based on all data, or take this job, 98% chance of hitting your goals.
Wow. Okay, if an AI could promise that, why would you struggle with the decision yourself? The uncertainty.
That's the allure, isn't it? It seems logical, efficient, maybe even safer to let the AI decide, especially for big things. We might want to outsource those choices.
But the big worry the sources raise is, what happens then to us, to society, when we start giving that control away?
One source maps out this potential slippery slope. They call it the master-partner-servant cycle.
Okay, break that down.
We start as master, building the tool. Then we become partner, working alongside it, letting it handle routine stuff, scheduling, drafting email.
Makes sense, enhancing our abilities.
But the danger zone is becoming the servant. Passive consumers, just trusting the AI's output without question.
Even for emotional stuff, moral questions, politics.
That's the fear, that we just accept the algorithm's suggestion or the optimal view it presents.
So the risk is, we stop thinking for ourselves. Critical thought gets outsourced.
Pretty much. When AI finishes your sentences, writes your essays, picks all your music.
And maybe even subtly guides your values through those personalized feeds.
Yeah. There's a real risk people just stop doing the hard work of thinking independently, just copy and paste, essentially.
It's like our echo chambers could get amplified, maybe even designed by corporate interests.
And this could lead to what sources call mental atrophy, like unused muscles, our critical thinking, our intuition. It could all weaken if AI does the heavy lifting.
Leaving people creatively dull, emotionally numb, morally dependent on algorithms.
That's the expressed concern, a real potential downside.
So let's connect these threads. The internal default OS and this fear of AI dependency. There's a parallel here.
A really strong one, yes.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder.
Is this fear that AI will turn us into automated programs just highlighting that maybe many of us are already running on automation from our own internal defaults?
That's the core question the sources push us towards. Is handing decisions to AI running someone else's script again, just made of silicon, fundamentally different from running on that inherited just how things are script?
Or is it basically the same challenge, just a different source for the code trying to run our lives?
It feels like a similar battle for agency, for conscious choice.
Now, the material isn't just doom and gloom about AI, but it does include some sharp criticism. One view calls the current rush the epitome of lemmingism.
Ouch.
Oh.
Strong words, meaning?
Meaning blindly following the hype, jumping on the bandwagon for profit, or FOMO, fear of missing out, without really thinking through the consequences.
Devaluing human skills, maybe? Rushing ahead without proper rules or safety checks, a digital stampede, like you said.
Exactly. But the sources immediately offer the counterpoint, the antidote to lemmingism.
Which is?
You can adopt AI critically, ethically. It's not about saying no, it's about engaging consciously.
Okay, so how do we do that? What are the strategies?
First, use AI as a tool, not a replacement. It should amplify human ability, but you keep the final say.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Keep humans in the loop.
Second, adopt with awareness. Understand the basics of how it works. Know it runs on data, and data can be biased. Ask questions.
Know its limits, essentially. Don't treat it like magic.
Third, set ethical boundaries. Ask, does this use empower people or exploit them? Does it help automate boring stuff, or does it eliminate jobs unfairly? Align it with good values.
Right. Choose wisely.
Fourth, think about decentralization. Look into open source AI, things you can run yourself locally. It gives you more control, more transparency, less dependency on big tech.
Good point. Avoid putting all the eggs in one corporate basket.
And fifth, focus on long-term value, not just the latest shiny object. Integrate AI, where it actually makes a lasting difference, not just because it's trendy.
So, tying this back to our rewriting theme, critical adoption, whether it's AI or our own beliefs.
It's about owning the process, right? Not resisting change, but consciously choosing how you engage with systems, internal or external.
Making sure they don't just become unquestioned defaults. It's the same kind of work as debugging your own internal code.
Yeah, it really is. Which brings up another point from the sources, this idea that everyone eventually kind of anchors themselves to some core belief system, a faith system, one source calls it.
Right. And this anchor could be anything. Traditional religion, sure, but also maybe just bravery or deep-seated distrust, faith in technology, or just faith in yourself.
And whatever that anchor is, it shapes everything.
Yeah.
How you see the world, what you trust, what you fight for. It's your fundamental orientation.
But the sources add that nuance again. How much do we really choose these anchors? Are they always pure choice?
Or are we sometimes conditioned, nudged, maybe even traumatized into what we anchor to?
Which loops right back to the default OS, doesn't it? Maybe some anchors aren't chosen programs, but more like preloaded defense mechanisms.
Yet the dialogue in the sources also make sure to point out, even in really tough, controlled societies, people still choose to think differently, to defy indoctrination.
Yeah, that power of human agency is always there, that capacity to push back against the default.
So the material kind of lands here. Yes, belief systems can be imposed like defaults.
Yeah.
But keeping them or changing them, that takes conscious choice. That's the reboot.
And this conscious defiance, this willingness to question and rewrite, that's presented as the human spark AI can't really touch. The ability to choose to think for yourself.
So real leadership, whether it's facing our internal defaults or these external AI systems, it's about balancing that questioning of the hype, the programming.
While still seeing the genuine value, the real utility, the truth in things.
Yeah.
It's a tricky balance.
So wrapping up this deep dive, the core connection we've explored is this really fascinating parallel, isn't it? We're wrestling with internal code, our default OS.
And at the same time, we're facing this explosion of external code AI that could become a whole new kind of default, or even potentially a master.
But that powerful message from the sources keeps echoing. We weren't meant to be run like programs.
Not by our past, not by machines. We were meant to rewrite.
Which leaves us all with a pretty potent thought to chew on. As you navigate this world full of inherited expectations and growing automation, how actively are you debugging your own default OS?
And how consciously, how critically are you choosing the tools and systems you let shape your life and your future?